For more content like this, visit www.teamtroponin.com.
This video is brought to you by First Attachment Nutrition, battle-tested nutrition, expert-formulated supplements. Join the First Attachment revolution.
What's up, guys? We are back and we are rolling with the Troponin episodes, episode 3. We are live.
All right, guys, to kick this off, our first question is a PD question. Somebody asked us, thoughts on replacing Primobolan with Masteron at the beginning of a prep or a diet phase. Is it advisable? Is it a good idea? I'll just start with my thoughts that this is something that I do to some degree. I mean, Primo has been my main anabolic other than test for like the last year and a half. I love it, but I don't know. I can't really explain exactly why, but once you get into a diet phase or a prep, especially when you have to achieve a certain look on stage, Masteron does seem to accomplish that a little bit better. It seems to have a little bit more of an anti-estrogenic property, which is great for when you're trying to lose fat, even if it's not the greatest thing for the off season. So those are my initial thoughts. But Justin, what do you think?
I think, well, this will definitely get comments in the comment section because everyone has a very strong opinion about both these compounds for some reason. If you follow me for any length of time, you know that what I think about Primobolan, and I think it's amazing for off season. And right now, the comments, there's already people furiously typing about how it's useless and it's so weak and there's no point in using it. And I can tell those people haven't tried it consistently. The reason it's so great for off season is it's so side effect free. Other than post injection pain, cue new people typing, it's pain free. That doesn't hurt at all. It usually does. It's a large crystalline structure that when it crystallizes out a solution in the muscle, it will cause quite a bit of pain and lumping. And if it doesn't do that, it's very likely that yours isn't real, or you get lucky, I guess. But cue more discussion. But yeah, I think it's one of the biggest thing in the off season, and I know we're talking pre-contest, but the biggest thing in the off season is keeping your appetite up. And when doses get higher, that's the problem. Orals kill your appetite. They ruin your liver. They ruin your blood work. Primobolan allows you to take a relatively high dose for a relatively long period of time with very minimal side effect, other than the fact that it lowers estrogen, which if you use the protocols I like to recommend, which are higher in test, that actually works out perfectly. But now in prep, when do you switch? Well, in prep, you want something a little more androgenic. You want that androgenic look. That's kind of what gives that gritty look to the skin, the thin skin, the grainy look. And so you want a more androgenic profile. The problem is that, and you're not gonna find much real research, real clinical study data on these things because there just wasn't that much. And there's stuff there was on human that were on human compounds were a long time ago. But Masteron, I've seen many times with clients that with longer term use, there becomes a very, very strong, which I'm assuming it's related to low estrogen or low E2 estradiol, issues with sexual dysfunction, erectile dysfunction, low interest, low libido, and other things like that. And I don't know, I don't know exactly why that happens. This is just my experience. When people use it for longer than about 12 weeks, it seems like these things just come on like a freight train. And then you start getting some of the mental health issues, whether it's correlated with the fact that you have those issues, which are not going to make you very mentally pumped or physically pumped, or that there's another like issue with the low estrogen. And I am not in like I know the basics of all the anabolics and all the compounds, and I've read the pharmacology of them, but they're not my interest. They're just not it. Outside of as a tool to force what we need to accomplish, I don't have a real strong interest in them. But if I remember correctly, estrogen actually, or Masteron actually can bind almost in similar to the way that the Nolvadex will bind to the estrogen receptor and not activate it, make it, not necessarily antagonize it, but not activate it. I believe it does it to prolactin as well. Go ahead.
Well, that's why it was called Masteron. I mean, it was used, like, if anyone doesn't know, the root word mast is like for breast, and it was used for breast cancer in women. Like, and I think as an alternative to either Nolvadex or even an AI, or maybe in conjunction with. And like personally, I've got like a little bit of gyno left over from puberty. I was fat during puberty, and it hasn't really gotten worse, but I certainly don't want it to get worse. And I feel like a little bit of Masteron can go a long way in helping that too. Not that I want to use it all year necessarily, but.
Yeah, that's perfect. So that's why you want it in pre-contest, because it's got an androgenic component and it's estrogen, and I believe it's anti-prolactin as well, which is kind of like a hidden estrogen that can impact people. Not everyone's prolactin sensitive, but one of the other compounds you'll use in prep will be trenbolone usually, and tren can really spike prolactin levels as well. It's got a lot of weird, people are going to be commenting on this too, because there's always debates on that, but there's weird effects on dopamine. And so prolactin is basically anti-dopamine. If you've ever, like Parkinson's people, what happens is they don't have the dopamine anymore, and their prolactin levels skyrocket. And one of the side effects of Parkinson's is basically gyno and then lactation. And, obviously prolactin is what you produce when you lactate, and people on enough tren have probably experienced that also. But where's that going with that? So it really works. It really helps mitigate some of the weird estrogenic issues you get with tren. So you got to find a way to kind of combine all that. We want the androgenic action of it. We want the anti-estrogenic action of it. We want the anti-prolactin estrogen action of it. We do not want the erectile dysfunction. We do not want the low libido. And so what, in my experience, it's best to bring that in somewhere around the 10-week mark, and then transition your Primobolan to Masteron around the 10-week mark, which is probably roughly around the time you're going to start bringing in trenbolone as well. I mean, these days people will bring it in earlier, but that's what I found is kind of the nice sweet spot where you transition from, because early on in a prep, people that like contest prep, like gear, there's no fat loss gear. There's no like hardening or, cutting gear. All they do is basically whether or not they affect estrogen or make you hold water. The gear doesn't burn fat. I mean, again, people furiously typing, there's some potential benefits with tren that
if I take a gram of tren, I can eat pizza and get shredded.
Of course, everyone, that's the other big thing. People, I'm taking GH and tren and I'm eating a pound of pizza a day and I'm getting leaner by the day. They never post pics, they just say that, and then 3 years down the road they're on the same forum posting the same thing, gaining 30 pounds, whatever. But early on in prep, you don't want those harsh, you want to be as untoxic as possible, because you're going to be toxic by show day, and that's the worst thing. You got to you're running into this brick wall, and you want to make sure that brick wall happens after the show so you can stop before you hit it. And so early on in prep, I like to keep off-season stuff, which you're still able to burn fat. Your estrogen, your body fat's not low enough where having a little bit elevated estrogen really is a detriment to burning fat. And then around the 10-week mark, then you start switching, pulling in the things that lower estrogen, pulling in the things that are more androgenic, things that don't hold water, and then the things that are slightly more toxic as well. But around that 10-week mark, to answer that question in one statement.
It's funny what you said about prolactin being anti-dopamine as well, because something I think I found this, I haven't looked hard for the effect, but I've heard tons of people say that having some Masteron in a stack will mitigate a lot of the mental side effects of tren, which there are some mental side effects of Mast, but tren, anyone knows who's taken even a small dose knows it's not a feel-good compound at all. And Masteron can make it feel not quite so bad.
You can get sexual side effects from tren that can be pretty frustrating. Depending on the case. At first, they might be kind of cool because elevated prolactin will make it difficult to climax, more difficult to climax. And with it, it'll decrease your libido, because prolactin is involved in the refractory period. So after a male ejaculates, there's a period called the refractory period afterwards where there's just his body doesn't produce anything that creates an interest in sex. And that's why, after you do it, you don't really want to do it again right away. And that's because the body secretes prolactin after you come. It's just so awkward. But I'm trying to keep it outside. After the refractory period, after a male ejaculates,
I'm 12 and this is funny.
Yeah, 43 and it still makes me laugh. But anyways, after a man finishes it, he releases prolactin. And so with tren, you get this weird thing is that you have such a surge in androgens that you have an insatiable drive, but combined with this weird prolactin effect that makes it difficult to finish. And early on, that might be interesting because you can last a little longer. Instead of doing a 3-pump jump, you're like a 9, maybe a 10-pump jump. And I don't think you're a chump anymore at that point, you're a hero. But anyways, but it can go too far. It can go too far because if prolactin gets too high, then you can have the inability to finish. And that's very difficult. And actually, one of the things that they'll recommend is as a medical condition, if you have the inability to finish, will be dopaminergics. At which you'll notice these names, the dopaminergics that they'll use will be pramipexole or cabergoline, which are also the things that people will use to mitigate the side effects from tren. Well, Masteron kind of solves that same effect what
Yeah.
as also being an androgen.
And if you've ever taken pramipexole or Caber, you would rather be on Masteron. Those drugs are nasty.
Yeah. You're like the nausea,
Mhm.
like your stomach twisted in knots. Yeah, and you're tired. And so yeah, so it's, I mean, it's an all-around great product, but again, there's, you know, like a bell curve of effectiveness. There's like good stuff, good stuff, good stuff. You stay at it too long and the good stuff turns into bad stuff. And so for me, it's always been around a 10-week recommendation.
Yeah. And so to address the original question, it wasn't just about using Masteron, but it was about kind of phasing it in phasing out Primobolan and bringing in Masteron. And I think it's a great approach because, I mean, you're only, even if you're pushing it, you're only going to take so much stuff and you don't want to be a complete pincushion. You don't want to take unnecessary milligrams. And like, I think people say Masteron's like not a mass builder, but I mean, I think all the basic stuff stimulates protein synthesis decently well. Like it wouldn't be my first choice for an off season, but you're still getting a little bit of an effect from the Masteron. And if you're also taking test and maybe trend at some point in prep, like you're getting all the anabolism you need. It's not like you need to keep the Primo in there and bring in Masteron and not reduce the dose of anything.
And I think when people get that so worked up with the mass builder, I think people just think mass means weight, you know, and it's like,
yeah.
Anadrol, if I blowed up 30 pounds, I mean, it's not a mass builder. And that's why people a lot of times don't like Primobolan, because you don't get that surge and bloat. But that's really no benefit other than, you know, powerlifting or leverages or things like that.
Yeah.
But as far as like adding muscle mass, you want the anabolism, not just water retention.
Well, I have a feeling that people who say that aren't really doing their job in terms of pushing food, because as someone who has pushed food for a couple of years now, I would much rather be on something that doesn't blow me any extra. I'm already full a lot of the time from, you know, 600-700 carbs or more on a high day. I would rather feel good.
Yeah, the people who like the bloat stuff have never been 285 with wicked back pumps where you can't even cook food at the counter without your back pumping out from all the fullness. Yeah.
If I can piggyback with one other question quickly, and this, I'm sure this will invite another cascade of comments, is about Proviron, because people also compare that for some reason or another to Masteron, not so much to Primobolan. People often say, should I take Proviron or Masteron? And it's kind of in a bit of a different context of lowering SHBG and maybe mitigating estrogenic side effects from a fairly high dose of tests. So what are your thoughts on that? I would think that maybe it's a better off-season choice just because you don't get those effects from running Masteron for long periods of time.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a nice, it helps minimize a lot of the issues that a lot of the other compounds cause. It, you know, it tends to lower estrogen, it lowers steroid hormone binding globulin, it increases free testosterone, it acts like an androgen in the body. So it kind of gives you the best of all the best of all the non-muscle building worlds, you know, as far as mental well-being, not having to worry so much about gyno. One of the problems though that I've seen is I think that you can actually, especially on high doses of test, raise your free testosterone levels so much to the extent that the free testosterone actually re-stimulates the lytic cells of the testes directly to produce sperm. And I've seen, and I actually have a protocol to do that on purpose, but I've seen that happen accidentally quite a few times over the years with clients on a rather large cycle with test and then often with Proviron, freaking out that their girl got pregnant, thinking it can't be mine because I'm on all this stuff, when actually the reason it's yours is because you're on all that stuff, specifically with extremely high free testosterone levels.
Yeah, I'm curious about what you mentioned about it being a kind of a gyno preventative as well. And I've heard people say that, and I would actually kind of like to try that myself versus taking even a small amount of Masteron in the off season. But why would that work? I mean, it's not.
I wish I need to have a computer in front of me. This stuff I haven't read in 25 years because this just hasn't been my main interest. Like Garrett just isn't. You know, everyone goes through that phase early on when they think, oh, these are, you know, this is the magic potion. I just got to find the secret magic potion. And eventually you try everything and read about everything and you realize there is no magic potion. It's the basic stuff. And the magic potion is the hard work and the food. And then again, people furiously typing in the comments, they don't believe that because they're in that process of trying all the different products. They haven't yet learned that there's no magic potion. But I can't remember the actual anti-estrogenic activity of it. I can't remember. I don't think it's not like a SERM, and I don't remember. I believe it does have anti-estrogenic activity, and I don't exactly remember why or how.
I mean, just anecdotally, and what you've seen with clients, have you ever seen someone say, okay, I'm not going to take Nolva this off season, I'm just going to take Proviron and have it just work just as well?
Yeah. I mean, like like people like in the sport now don't remember what it's like. You used to not be able to get anti-estrogen. There was no Arimidex until like the very early 2000s, like maybe late 90s. There was no Aromacin, there was no Letrozole. There was only Teslac and then Nolvadex, which was difficult to get, and Proviron. That's what you used. You used, you know, like if you had if you really knew people, you could get Teslac, you know, and that's like what the pros would do. And I don't even remember how that worked, because as soon as AIs came out, everyone ditched all that stuff. But it was like, and then if you could find Nova, which there were no underground labs back then. You got stuff from Turkey or Greece or Mexico. And so you were, you know, like that was difficult to get, because you could get veterinary stuff, you know, no problem, but like stuff actually made for like breast cancer patients, that's like a legit medical thing. That's difficult to get in any country, you know. So stuff was hard to get then. So that's what people would use, would be Proviron with Teslac, and then occasionally Nolvadex, but it was surprisingly hard to get back then. And there was no AIs.
Dana, did you want to talk about the USA stuff?
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, it'd be interesting for people to hear kind of where. So last week we talked a lot about your decision to do, should you compete nationally? Should you go to USAs? And I think just the idea of, are you ready to compete nationally, for a lot of people is a really relevant topic. And you kind of came to a little bit of a decision this week. I think it'd be good to kind of hear your thought process with that, and what helped you get to that place, and how you're feeling about things now.
Yeah, so ultimately I decided not to do USAs. And just to kind of recap what we talked about last time, you know, the kicker for me, honestly, and again, this sounds a little bit shitty to say out loud, but it was like, do I have a realistic shot at winning, or at least winning the super heavies? Because I'm not within shot of the heavies by any means anymore. And I think the answer is a pretty clear no. Like, it'd be a long shot. I think other people would have to come in off, because as much size as I've gained, I mean, some of these guys they're going to weigh more than I will. They're shorter than I am. They're thicker than I am. They have more time. They've had more time to develop that kind of 3D look. And so, you know, if my ultimate goal is to turn pro and competing isn't the thing that I love, then why do an extra show this season, was basically my thought process. And Justin laid out a bunch of good kind of counter arguments or things to consider as well. Like, do you want to go ahead and get seen on the national level so you don't get ignored when you're really ready to turn pro? And I think that was a totally valid thing, and it made me reconsider a little bit. But, you know, ultimately, to be honest, I'm not burnt out yet, but I think I would absolutely be burnt out of this whole prep with another 3 weeks. You know, usually we do a 16-week prep. We already extended it to 17 weeks because we moved here to Texas a few weeks into prep, and we had tacked on an extra week just in case anything got disrupted, which it didn't. But, you know, every week you're in prep, it gets harder and harder. There's been a ton of different life changes and stressors during this whole prep, more than you'd usually want to take on during a prep. I started a new job. Now I'm looking at maybe starting yet another one, because this kind of contracting gig sucks that I'm on. But there's just a whole lot of factors, and I'm pretty brain dead right now, and I'm just about at my wit's end. So basically my decision is to sprint across the finish line, as we try to do, get as lean and depleted as possible, and then jump right into the rebound and off season, and try to have another super productive, 20-pound or so stage weight gain, and probably hit the USA's hard next year with the hope of, either winning or at least placing very well, and like really getting myself on that top level competitor scene. And it's a little bit bittersweet, but to be honest, like I'm really happy about the decision. I'm quite looking forward to digging into the off season, to like having my wits about me again, and not feeling like a psycho like you always kind of do at the end of prep. So,
and, it's interesting too, just watching you train, and when you were even still considering doing USAs, as your training partner and your wife, even just like the way that you would talk about continuing through USAs, I was like, he just sounds like he doesn't want to do it. And Justin, I think you mentioned too that you really only have a couple of those in you, where you can just kind of grind it out, keep going before you're really kind of just over the sport. Is that something that you experienced at any point, Justin?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I mean, I did it to myself a couple times, but that's like as a whole general concept that's very important in the sport, is because we do it because we love it, and so people think as a different version of that would be like force feeding. And I always tell people, like why we choose the gear we choose in the off season is because we don't want to kill your appetite. And people say, oh, I don't eat for taste, I eat, for purpose. It's like, I know you do, but that's because you love the sport right now.
Right.
You're not going to force feed for 12 years. You're not. You think you will right now. Everyone thinks they will right now because you will right now, but it's not 12 years from now. And so you only have, you only can do things you hate so often before you no longer love the sport. You love the sport because you love the sport. If everything you're doing you hate, there's only so long before that love for the sport dissipates. And what mine was just letting myself get too overly obsessed in a time where like so many other things were going on in my life. Mine was basically just being hyper restrictive with my diet, eating the exact thing, kind of deciding this is the best food and not straying from that basically for several years until it was just, like it stopped being fun. It stopped being, I didn't love it anymore. It was, and you get so burnt, so stuck in a rut that now you start thinking like, well, I decided this was the perfect meal approach. And so if I vary from it, it's no longer perfect. I'm not going to progress as fast as I could. And you just kind of snowball into this rut. And you can do the same thing with competing. You think, well, no, well, I plan on this. I had this all planned out. I was going to do it this year, do it this, and if you force yourself to do that, then you stop, you stop loving the sport. And if you don't love the sport, you're not going to be in the sport. But
I will say that, oh, go ahead.
Well, I think a secondary thing that's actually really important is that you can make the self-assessment. And I think we talked about this last podcast, episode 2, if anyone wants to listen. I think we talked about the fact that why people need coaches. And it's very rarely a knowledge thing. But the reason people need coaches and can't prep themselves is go to any show and how many people step off stage and can't understand why they didn't win and legitimately think they got screwed when they didn't. And that's why, because you're not capable of self-assessment and you would not bring yourself into the proper condition if you can't see what just happened. And so the fact that you can see, that, whether or not you really truly weren't, but you could see, I think you have a good understanding of where I'm at, could happen, other people need to be off. I still have these things that need to be brought up before I'm at the place where I know that I'm fully ready to win, regardless of who else is off or on. And that's actually a really important thing that most people who succeed in the sport have, and most people who don't succeed do not have. The people who do a show year after year after year, not win, convinced they got screwed and not realizing they didn't get screwed, they didn't have X, Y, and Z that they needed to win, and they never get X, Y, and Z because they aren't able to self-assess.
Yeah, I think in addition to the whole self-assessment thing, I realize more and more that like being like good and consistent with bodybuilding is kind of good at teaching you to like respect your present self and your future self, because we like, especially at the beginning of prep, like you're at the end of the off season, you're kind of sick of food and you're also like really ready to see yourself shredded and see the progress that you made over the off season. You're like, hell yeah, prep, it's going to start. And it's funny how I hear so many people who aren't even very good competitors take on that attitude whenever they start a prep, and it just does not carry through to the end, or it doesn't carry through well enough to have them not cheat on their diet and to have them continue to work hard at cardio. Like it clearly fades. And it's the same with what you said about force feeding. Like you need to recognize that your motivation will wane, and you need to have a consistent set of habits that you can actually maintain, and to like really organize the rest of your life to make this possible if it's important to you.
And it's probably a part of evolution. We never had to do this before. We only had to live in the moment. We had to find food. We had to find shelter for hundreds of thousands of years. It's only a very new phenomenon that we could think about the future and prepare for it. So that just wasn't the way we lived. But it's like just a general thing that I see all the time. People have today, and then they have this future goal, and they never like reassess if they're on track for it or even look for that. You see people all the time, I want to be a pro bodybuilder. Okay, you said that for 3 years. You've progressed 0%. When does it, like what timeline do you have? 300 years? Because you're still not on track for it. You need to do those things with everything. If you want, you want to weigh 250 pounds on stage. Well, if you're weighing 185 right now, 250 is a long way. So if you're not 200 next year, that's 15 pounds. If you're not 200 next year, it's not happening in the next 5 or 6 years. So, but people don't, that's one of my biggest pet peeves in general with people is they don't like, they don't think those things through, you know, like if you're climbing a hill, you're moving up a couple feet each step, you know, you don't just walk like this and then suddenly you're at the top of a hill. And so that's like just as a general side comment I have, that I see that all the time where people, you know, say, I want all these things. I want to be a pro bodybuilder, or I get all the time, I want to be a coach. I want to coach. And I think we talked about this in the previous podcast on, you know, how to become a coach. Well, what did you do today to improve your ability to be a coach? Did you learn anything about coaching? Did you read anything about nutrition? Did you start a LLC for your name? Did you start a website? Did you look in, you know, there's a lot of steps to any goal. And all you have is today. And if you didn't take any steps towards that goal, don't be surprised if you never get there.
Mhm.
One more thing on this topic, I will say that last week in the episode 2, Justin mentioned that we might have done the diet a little bit differently, i.e. a little harder, had we known that this was going to be a one and done show. So after the podcast, we were still chatting. I said, all right, do I need to go ahead and like slash all added fats and the intra workout carbs to make sure I'm truly lean and depleted enough to put a good showing forth and maximize the rebound? And of course he said, yeah, that'd be a good idea. So for the final, I guess, 2.5 weeks, we did cut all fat, and that between the fats and the intra carbs, that was probably a good like 400 calorie slash on a medium day. And it sucks ass, but it's definitely working. So
You don't realize like the little 7 grams of added fat in 1 or 2 meals.
Oh,
per day.
it
You
goes
don't
a
realize
long
how
way.
much they carry you until you don't have it, and you're like, "What am I doing? Where are my hands?"
yeah, and then you get to a low, you get to a low day, and it's literally protein and vegetables.
Yeah, well, it's so weird because, you know, a calorie, not necessarily a calorie is a calorie, but thermodynamics holds, you know, and that's absolutely true. But the only thing that ever makes me question that is the added fats, because it's amazing how much a physical change in a hurry, both physically and mentally and emotionally, and you just everything when you remove the small amounts of added fat. It's
Oh man, it's funny you said mentally, because like I was already very hungry and I love food and I'm kind of a fat ass at heart. And so I was already looking forward to, like, you know, post-show food. My food focus just skyrocketed with that fat out of there. It's like, you're not giving your body anything nourishing. Like even like I have a couple flank meals on low day and like, it's a little bit fattier, but it's still a very lean meat. Like, so with so little fat content, you're just like, it's almost like eating nothing. Cause like protein doesn't count as far as like sustenance in my mind. So, but
you'll notice
that Dave's mentioned the last couple of days too, is just pulling the fat out. He went from feeling like he was, you know, like doing okay to like finishing sentences is challenging. And it's been, I think, just hearing you say that multiple times has been pretty telling.
yeah.
it's lost my thought. And I even have fat in my diet. No, it's a weird thing how much it changes when you remove, and then you get other weird things. Like, I don't know if your sweat's been smelling like ammonia, or because it's really because you're burning protein as your primary source of that, you know, like you always were, but now you're running on protein, and you're not meant to run on protein.
Well, that, like, we talked about that, like, metallic kind of acetone breath that you get during the end of prep. And before this point in prep, it would always be there by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of the week, you know, like the furthest days removed from the high day when you're most depleted. And as soon as you pulled that fat, like we had our high day yesterday and I'm already back to that point. Like I wake up and I have my mouth tastes like that. And I like go on I start with like a tiny bit of energy in the day. And by the time I finish that first steady state walk, it's like, yeah, I'm just back.
It's like putting a soup strainer on high day. The car just through.
Going hypo walking. Like I get 2 minutes, you know, like I'm on the treadmill and I'm doing incline just because I started with it. So I'm, you know, 4 weeks out and I'm like, I guess I got to keep doing what I've been doing, unfortunately. And like 20 minutes in, I'm like hanging on, and like that feeling that runners get when they finish a marathon and they're like stumbling forward. I mean, it feels like that walking at like, you know, 2.4 miles an hour on an incline.
That's actually a good topic we weren't planning to cover, but going hypo, and another reason I don't like orals, because one of the big problems with heavy oral use in prep is that the damage to the liver. And when the liver enzymes get elevated and the liver gets damaged, it's much less effective at releasing liver glycogen to maintain stable blood sugar levels. And that's the primary role of the liver as far as liver glycogen, not the role of the liver, but as far as liver, the glycogen in the liver, that's what it's there for, to maintain stable blood sugar levels. And so when you combine a diet that's reducing in carbohydrates dramatically, and then late in prep, probably reducing in fats, and you've been taking heavy oral doses, so your liver's ruined, you have no ability to maintain blood sugar levels. And that can ruin a diet in a hurry, because if you're hypo, you stop thinking logically and you stop thinking, your brain goes to survival. Every survival instinct in your body is to find sugar. You could have zero idea what a sugar is. You have no nutritional knowledge. You go hypo, your body's finding sugar somehow. You know, it's like magic.
I came back from that walk on Friday and Dave was like, "Are you okay?" And like, I don't even think I could get words out of my
Oh
mouth.
yeah. And I'm one to talk. I look at you and I'm like, "Are you okay?" But the day prior, I was like, "Oh, I need to mow the lawn, and that'll be like part of my cardio." So I turned on Map My Walk, because I try to keep my distance consistent, because I know I'm going to start slowing down at the end of prep. So I mowed the lawn, and it's fucking hot here in Texas, and so I'm already like probably sweated out like a liter of water. And I look at Map My Walk, I was like, all right, I have like a mile and a half left. And so I go and finish my walk. And by the time I got back there, like, I didn't know if I was going to make it. And it was just a walk.
Yeah, it's like, if you need to change your physique in a hurry, beyond just the caloric change, and it's really just because you're just stripping everything, you know, and so you just flush out every little last bit of water and stuff. But yeah, dropping fats are almost like magic. I mean, you only have a couple of weeks before it stops being magic, and it becomes, what's the version of hell that's magic? It turns into that, you know. But and it's really bad on physique long term, because you flatten out to so much that you can't come back from it. But
Yeah.
a couple of weeks.
Go ahead, Dave.
On the orals thing, that made me wonder about like the opposite scenario. So in off season, like, you always advise, almost always, not to use orals in the off season, or maybe Anavar here and there, but nothing liver toxic. Could that be another factor that influences whether you maintain a good blood glucose level?
Oh yeah,
in the off season?
that's one of the main reasons I don't. That's one of the primary reasons I don't like them. I mean, the appetite is a big thing, but appetite really only becomes it's only the really big guys where it's an issue. If you're 170 pounds, you don't get to eat that much food, so it's not that hard to. Even force feeding is like 6 ounces of meat and a cup of rice isn't force feeding, you know. And so it's really, that's one of the biggest things, is because you know your liver enzymes are already going to be elevated from training, because your liver has to process the byproducts of muscle breakdown. So you're already going to be, you know, your liver enzymes are going to be 40 to 50, whatever the US units are, you know, like slightly elevated, but not terrible. And so you add orals on top of it, you can very quickly get to the point, you get your liver enzymes into the hundreds, low 100, like over 100, you're at that point. You're no longer properly maintaining stable blood sugar levels. And so your body's got to, if your blood sugar dips and your liver glycogen can't create it, and it's difficult to release muscle glycogen. Muscle glycogen generally gets released with exercise. And so you're just sitting there and your blood sugar dips and your liver can't make up for it. You have to create that glucose somehow. And we've discussed that a million times. If we need to create new glucose, that sounds like gluconeogenesis, which means you're breaking down muscle, which means or protein, which means you're breaking down muscle. And so it can be like incredibly counterproductive on multiple levels. And that's actually, as a totally different side note, that's one of the biggest problems with alcoholics when they stop drinking, is their liver being so damaged. And now they've lost that extra energy source, because you know, you drink alcohol isn't a sugar, and it doesn't convert to sugar in the body. That's a common misconception. It just stays as alcohol, but you can use alcohol directly as an energy source. And when the alcohol is there as an energy source, you're not using glycogen as much, you're not using carbohydrates, because you're using the alcohol. And for our case, if you've ever dried out with me for a show, we use alcohol the night before. The reason we use it is because it works on antidiuretic hormone rather than sodium. You know, we don't want to lower sodium anymore at that point. Like a typical diuretic will work through sodium. We want to work through antidiuretic hormone. And then on top of that, it supplies the alcohol calories, which allows you to not burn up any of the glycogen. So once we've filled out and dried out, and we want to finish drying out without flattening out, we don't want to push any more sodium out of the body, and we don't want to lose any more glucose or glycogen. So we use the alcohol to affect the antidiuretic hormone, dry out a little bit, and the alcohol preserves your glycogen stores. But with alcoholics, what happens when they stop drinking and their liver is damaged and they don't have that extra energy source of alcohol, they can go like critically low blood sugar into a coma even. It's a very common, like, serious side effect of alcohol recovery.
So deeper into contest prep, when people are on more orals, is there anything they can do to prevent some of those hypo episodes? I mean, is there, you know, we've talked about the use of things like, you know, berberine just for insulin sensitivity, but is there anything that it directly acts on glycogen utilization from liver?
I mean, you could potentially use higher fructose foods. And actually, Chad Nichols actually used to carb up a lot on high fructose
Yep.
foods.
Apple pie filling.
Yeah, and fructose can like potentially some more preferentially be stored as liver glycogen. And so, but you don't want to, I mean, if you have to, you got to do what you have to do, but you don't want to get in that boat because fructose isn't a great energy, you know, of the sugary energy sources. And all carbs or sugars is an energy source because they get converted, they don't enter the bloodstream until they've been broken down to simple sugar form. Even complex carbohydrates, big clusters or, you know, molecules of glucose and fructose or whatever, they get broken down into the sugars. So it's really, but yeah, you don't, it's a way to somewhat mitigate the problem, but it's much better to not have the problem. But if you needed to, you could use the fructose.
Like, let's say someone's carb restricted. So like, let's say I came back from that walk the other day and I'm super hypo and I'm like, well, I can't, you know, I get a rice cake with my dinner.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. That's why pulling fats makes it so hard, because the way to fix that would be to keep fats in to slow the digestion, so you get a much slower trickle of the few carbohydrates you do have. Because let's think, like, you know, we always do like the first principles thing. That's what I think what happened. You have that rice cake. You eat that rice cake, your gastric emptying rate is like astronomically high because you're so hungry. So it wastes no time in the stomach. It goes right to the small intestine. And your body is amazing at extracting nutrients right now because your small intestine isn't loaded with gunk because you don't get any food. So there's tons of surface area. All the outside surface of the small intestine's got nothing blocking it. So those sugars get broken down. They reach the villi in the small intestine. They pass through into the bloodstream all really quickly because there's no fats to slow anything down. So as soon as they find some water and some sodium, it goes up and gets stored as glycogen, it gets burned off as energy, and there's anything left over gets moved and shuttled somewhere, and then boom, you got no blood sugar anymore. And that's where the liver would come in. But so that's why it's really doubly bad at latent prep, because all the things we have to mitigate it, we can't add fructose because we don't have enough carbs. We're pulling fats, and we're not going to add fat, you know, at the end of the diet. That's a super calorie dense thing. And if your liver's foobarred, your whole prep can be foobarred.
Yeah.
So is there anything that can be done?
No, other than like,
Or is it just like, you know, it's one of those things that you just kind of embrace the suck and roll with it.
Yeah.
well, I mean, it's only so much you can embrace the suck, because people are not going to be hypo all day. They're going to eat sugar. So if you get to that point, you have to like decide on a compromise. And so what you might do is lower your protein intake and raise your fat intake. And doing that really sucks because you lose that thermogenic benefit of the protein. You know, we talked maybe 15% of the protein you eat gets burned just in the digestion. Fat doesn't have that. So if you're replacing 100 calories of protein, you can really only replace, you know, 85 calories of fat. And then fat is so calorie dense, you're basically cutting your food volume in half for the same number of calories. And so that's really tough latent prep. And, you know, you could add carbohydrates, but then that we're trying to keep blood sugar levels low. We want them stable, but we want them low because we don't want a spike of blood sugar that's going to kind of stop whatever fat burning we have, or minimize whatever fat burning we're having, and then start burning glycogen all easily again. So you really, I mean, that's just and then just go like, just as a general thing, that's why I'm just not a fan of orals. They just throw such a wrench into like the potential downfalls in prep are really high. They're like so high that they can screw your whole prep. And the potential downfalls in the off season are the same. You know, like you lose your appetite, your blood pressure goes up, you blow out your kidneys. It's just, I'm just not a fan. And like, not just for reasons of I don't like them. It's not a fan because the things they do, they don't do necessarily any better than injectables, and the things they don't do are really bad, or the things they do negatively are really negative.
I think that's really, really, really important for people to hear, especially female competitors, just knowing that there are a lot of coaches out there who maybe push orals quite a bit, and just kind of hearing Justin's take on things and having worked with him now as a female competitor who's stayed relatively healthy. I just highly, highly encourage any dudes who are either dating or married to females or, are a female competitor, please do your research with a good coach.
Yeah, and it's such I mean, it just sucks because people die left and right in the sport, and it doesn't have to happen. I mean, all my guys are super heavies, and if they're not super heavies, they get to super heavies really quick, or so it's not like doing these things that that can save your life affect growth at all, and the opposite. They amplify it, you know, and it's so weird. But people want that 30 pounds of bloat that Anadrol gives, or they, you know, and it's I don't understand it, because
Psychological perception of feeling bigger as a dude, and the exchange that you make for the psychological perception of feeling bigger from the bloat versus the health exchange. It's just so interesting to me. It's something that we ran into someone at the gym the other day who said, who was talking about just the health risks associated with competing and what you need to do to get there. And he said he never ran anything crazy, but as a gal, and I'm married to someone who's pretty conservative, you just don't think about these things.
Yeah, and another good, Paul Barnett, about bodybuilding, his YouTube channel, you know, like, it cracks me up because he gets hate comments about his doses and his cycles, you know, and the guy's added like 100 pounds of muscle in 2 years, in 1 year.
Too.
And no one believes it, and no one wants, you know, and it's not like you even have, it's not like you have to run baby doses. There's certain things you can do, and you can be pretty wild with it and still come out on the other end healthy. And it's not like you're making any compromise. You're going to get bigger. Like all these people I'm talking about are people adding 50, 70 pounds a year of stage muscle. And so it's just like, they don't understand. It doesn't make sense to me, but you know.
I think the part of the rationale for using orals, at least among guys in the off season, is really putting the cart before the horse, because I'll hear some people justify it saying that they want the training performance boost that you get from orals, which is certainly a thing. I mean, if you're running test and Primobolan and you add in, you know, a bunch of D-ball or even Anavar, which doesn't put that much weight on you, through one mechanism or another, you will probably get stronger in a very short order. But that's not really the kind of strength gain that you want when you're going to build muscle. Like, we talk about progressive overload all the time, but what we really mean by progressive overload is progressive overload is the result of having put enough tension on the muscle such that it got bigger and is therefore stronger. Like, if I can hack, you know, like one more plate per side a month later, that's because all the weeks of work leading up to that, I put enough tension on my quads to make them bigger, which made them stronger. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but this isn't like powerlifting strength gains where we're trying to train the neural component. And so if you're using an oral to get that immediate strength boost, like, you could kind of argue like, oh, well, I'm using more weight and therefore I could put more tension on the muscle. But even that's dubious, because if you achieve that by just adding 20 pounds of bloat, it's that extra leverage that's really helping you move the weight. It's not extra cross-sectional area of the muscle. And that's why as soon as you take the oral away, you're going to realize that you barely gained anything from it. Whereas if you stick with your basic stuff and gain weight slowly, that's why the muscle sticks, so to speak, because the strength gains you made were actually mostly a result of a bigger muscle.
Yeah, it's basically just putting on a tighter knee sleeve or wrapping your knee tighter. So, you wrap your knees tighter, you lifted more weight, but your muscle wasn't stronger. That's why, I mean, that's why Mark Bell's a millionaire, because of his slingshot, you know, because slingshot's like the ultimate oral. You put that on, bench, you know, your chest muscles aren't any stronger, it didn't grow anymore, but it is fun putting 100 more pounds on the bar, especially when people are looking at or watching you.
Justin, we just had a couple of questions come through. Go ahead, Dave, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, what we were talking about as far as ways you can mitigate like blood sugar issues and extreme hunger, that was a good lead into one of the topics that we did have come in from people, which is, it's kind of a two-parter. One is, well, the first part of it is just kind of, what are your hacks, tricks, strategies for mitigating hunger when calories are really low? And this has always been something I've struggled with, because I mean, I have a massive appetite. With the off-season eating, it's not been that hard for me so far. And prep is hard. And so a couple things that I do personally are, all of my added fats come from foods I can actually eat. So even in the off season, I never really use oil. I like avocados, my favorite, and my second favorite would be almonds or almond butter. And obviously that brings a little bit of extra calories to the equation, but if that's consistent from off season to prep, I don't think you need to change it just so that you're like getting slightly less fiber or protein from your fat source. It's fine. And I'm going to stay way fuller and more satisfied mentally if I can eat, 50 grams of avocado, which is about 7 fat, versus a half a tablespoon of oil, which feels like nothing, tastes like almost nothing. And then other than that, like eating enough vegetables, but like, I'll just say choose the right ones. Don't just load up on broccoli, because you'll just be farting all the time. And you might even end up on stage with a distended stomach because you've blown it out by eating gaseous vegetables the whole prep.
I'll say, maybe I could even refer clients to this, whatever the minute mark is on this, but just to like once and for all, if it's 0 calorie, it's free. So diet soda, Crystal Light, soda water, diet tonic water. Don't have too much of that because the quinine can eventually not be good for you. But all those things, and then any 0 calorie sodium or seasoning, almost all dry seasonings are going to be, or dry. Dave knows what seasoning and what the special terms are, but anything that's not liquid is probably almost 0 calorie. Those are free. You can drink, and I think that's one of our questions, so I won't answer it, but you can drink a case of Diet Mountain Dew a day. I don't care. It's probably not the greatest thing for you, but it's really, I mean, that's another thing that's stupid that people argue about. 50% of Americans are going to die of obesity related illness, and almost all of those are going to die linked with diabetes. But somehow people are worried about drinking a Diet Coke, which drives me crazy, especially people are worried about aspartame. All aspartame is 2 amino acids. One of them is phenylalanine. When you digest it, the phenylalanine, the first thing it does is it breaks out an L-tyrosine and a phenyl, whatever. And L-tyrosine. L-tyrosine is the precursor for the dopaminergic pathway. It converts to L-dopa, which then converts to dopamine, which then converts to norepinephrine and epinephrine, which is like adrenaline hormones or Adderall. And so if anything, you're taking like a micro dose of Adderall if you're taking aspartame. It's just an amino acid. It's ridiculous that people get all worked up about that, but you can drink as much of those as you want. Other things that I would recommend are pickles, and even pickle juice. And it's surprisingly, because the high sodium content of that can kind of change the osmolarity of the stuff in your stomach and kind of keep things in your stomach longer, draw fluid into your stomach. The high sodium spike in your stomach, that's going to attract water into your stomach. You can almost bloat yourself and create a sense of full, which is the high bolus dose of a high sodium liquid. Now be careful drinking sodium liquid. Don't add salt to your water, because if you drink anything that's more than 0.9% sodium in a liquid form, your kidneys can't process it, and you can actually die of dehydration because of it. So be careful with that. But and then I would always recommend cucumbers with balsamic vinegar, cucumbers with salt, cucumbers with balsamic vinegar and salt.
Cucumbers with Splenda and cinnamon.
Yeah. See, I'm a salt guy. Yeah, I guess. So I'm only going to say the salty stuff. Give me all your sweet tips. And then like iceberg lettuce with balsamic vinegar, not vinaigrette, not with oil, but just iceberg lettuce with balsamic vinegar. If it comes down to cheating on your diet or not cheating on your diet, eat an entire head of lettuce, rip it all apart, put it in a giant bowl, pour balsamic vinegar on it till your lips turn white because the acid ate away the top layer of skin. You're going to get a couple of calories that you're probably burning off chewing all that fibrous iceberg lettuce. Those are all the tips, anything like that that'll fill in your stomach and provide some flavor. I don't have very many sweet flavored ones though. So if you guys have tips on that, fire them away.
Dang.
Dave's a salty guy. I'm a schizo, sweet salty. But on that note of vegetables and whatnot, is there a too much? Because I think that was one of the follow-up questions. Like, is there, yeah.
I used to have, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've got a bit of a TMI about that, but I think during our first prep, when we just weren't used to dealing with this level of hunger, I ate a lot of salad. And when I say salad, I mean raw vegetables. And that, even with having some added fats still in the diet, that stopped me up really bad. And it's really weird when you're eating that little and you can't poop. And it was incredibly uncomfortable for like 2 weeks. And I think that was the culprit. And that's why I said, don't go crazy with certain things, even if you are extremely hungry, because you will end up in an even more uncomfortable spot. And I guess just in general, I'd say cook most vegetables. Like cucumbers are one that can be eaten raw in large quantities. And then like anything that you could pickle, like a cucumber or maybe like red onions and carrots, I've been really into, but limit the carrots. But, yeah, I've been eating.
Your recipe.
Yeah.
But there is a limit, and I have a story of a female client, maybe 18, 19 years ago, who went to the ER. At that time, I hadn't put a cap on vegetable count. Now, like if I have you eat no carbs, and I used to say just no carbs, but I let you eat vegetables from this list. Now I put a cap and I say like 10 grams of carbs from vegetable sources. So there's a limit. And the reason is, and I won't say this person's name, a female client a long time ago in the ER who was eating at least 40 stalks of asparagus 6 times a day.
Oh, wow. That's expensive.
I don't even know how, but like, I mean, 40 stalks, and these are like big Michigan asparagus, you know, like not like the ones you find, like these are like fresh, like, I mean, you get
wow.
like one of those big things you get like, you know, from the store, there's like 8, 9, 10 asparagus. So even like 4 of those, I mean, it's like, yeah, like 100 pounds of asparagus a day. I don't even know what it was. I don't know how, but it's like, you know, like something in your brain has to think like, I'm on a diet and I have to accept a little bit of hunger. I mean, she had to be so full that it was painful. She went to the ER, but yeah, there's definitely a limit. You know, you are dieting, you're going to have an emptier stomach than normal. But for me, I kind of set a limit. It's a loose limit because I would, like I said, if it comes down to cheating on the diet or eating a whole head of lettuce, obviously that's the better choice than getting chocolate cake. But yeah, you can really ruin your insides if you're eating, you know, 100 pounds of vegetables a day.
I think that brings up a valuable topic though, where a lot of people in prep, they're afraid of being hungry. And like, you have to just embrace that, like, you're going to be hungry. And as soon as you just start to accept that you're going to be uncomfortable and you're going to be hungry and you're going to be tired and it's really not worth bitching about. I think for a lot of people that kind of turns things around. Last year, this time I was working with a company who did we worked with a lot of bikini competitors, and I had girls all the time telling me that they were just so hungry and they, you know, it was just so hard. And I remember telling them point blank, at one point I pulled up my meal, which at that point was 135 grams of egg whites and 50 grams of 96.4 ground beef rinsed, so the fat was off, and 50 grams of carrots and some broccoli. And that was my breakfast. And I remember just pulling that up on camera and being like, look, I get it. But at some point you have to just accept that being hungry, it's like, it's not a villain to be defeated. Like, it's just going to be part of it and you have to embrace it. And so I think a lot of people fight that, and you have to, as soon as you recognize that not only is it part of the process, but it's actually a really valuable part. I think that kind of flips the narrative a little bit. And I think when you're dieting, having the ability to flip the narrative is incredibly important.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, that could be, we should do a whole topic on that. But yeah, I mean, we should, you know, thank God that we're in a first world country where hunger is a confusion for us. Hunger is you know, I mean, there's large chunks of the world, very large chunks of the world where that is life, you know, where hunger is the norm. And that's human existence. That's how it was, you know, that we were persistence hunters, which this is kind of an interesting side topic. One of the things we do better than all other species is dissipate heat. We sweat better, sweat earlier, sweat finer, have more pores to sweat, and have more surface area to body mass than almost any other animal. And then our bipedal motion is a very, very efficient form of long distance motion. So where other animals like will pant, you know, they'll sweat maybe a little bit, but most of their heat releases through their tongue panting. Early humans, what they would do would chase animals literally until the other animal died of exhaustion or heat exhaustion before eating them. That's how we hunted before we had really sophisticated tools. That's how we're meant to not only go without food, but do cardio until other animals die in front of us to get our first meal of the day. And so, you know, we should like, and the other thing we say, put in perspective, I can give the same diet to give a diet, and I don't want to be like, nothing against females, but it seems to be more often the case with females. Maybe not actually, now that I think about it. You give the same diet as a starting off-season diet, and someone who's overweight, and you need to find a way to, you know, not overweight, like higher body fat than is optimal. And you need to find a way to give them the right nutrients to be able to synthesize new muscle without any fat gain and possibly even losing some fat. You give that person a diet in the off season and they're complaining about how much food it is. All this lean, clean food, oats. I can't eat that much oatmeal. You give that exact same diet to someone who's mentally knows they have to diet for a show and they think they're going to be hungry. That exact same diet is now the diet they're complaining about being so little food. And it's the same, you know, it's the same food. And it's like that mindset, like we should do a whole topic on that, because that is, mastering that is the key to the sport.
I mean, I've even realized the last couple of days, usually, and Dave, don't take this wrong way, when I'm home and when we're both prepping and we're both tired, I feel more tired. But as soon as I'm out, I always tell myself, by the time I get to the gym and I start talking to people, as much as my training feels like crap right now, mentally, I feel so much better just because I'm not in an environment where the entire narrative is hungry, tired. And so I think there's a lot to be said for really just learning how to kind of build up the walls and be very selective on what influences your internal state.
Mhm. I mean, I feel the same way. This is probably the liveliest I've felt all day talking on this podcast because you're talking about stuff that's engaging. Like, I mean, I'm not at 100% capacity by any means, but I'm a lot more mentally lively than I was like 3 hours ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's just a general thing. I think that's one of the, like, not to get like too outside of our main focus, but why like depression and things like that are so high in America now, and why I think eventually we're going to get AI and robots. 67% of GDP is service industry. As soon as we have functional AI that can replace humans in the service industry, we're going to have universal basic income, which everyone thinks is great. I don't have to work and I get money. But I think it's going to be terrible. I think it's going to exacerbate the issues with depression and stuff we have now, which I think have already been exacerbated with the increased push to work from home. Yes, you want to work from home. I understand that. But a perfect example of what you guys just discussed, I kept a job as an echocardiographer when I was making much more through bodybuilding and coaching, and even when I was sponsored with Optimum Nutrition, largely because of that. Prep was terrible on the weekends because I had nothing to do but sit and think about how miserable I was. I was still miserable, but when I had to go to work, my meal times were structured. I had no choice in the matter. I didn't even get to think about like I wish I could eat, or like force myself to not eat because I didn't have a choice. I only had my specific break times that I was allowed to eat, and there were large chunks of time where I was with a patient or I had to walk somewhere. I had no other choice to do that, and those little things. I mean, we're just not evolved to like, well, yeah, the pursuit, like the pursuit of happiness. That phrase like seems silly now. That was a novel concept 200 years ago when we wrote the Constitution, because back then you were content to survive. The pursuit of happiness, that was like a bold idea. You know, we're now like we're just not good at that. We're not good with freedom to pursue our interests because we don't know what our interests are, because the majority of human existence was our interests were satisfying deep internal needs of the moment, finding food, finding shelter, finding, a mate. That was like, and so we didn't have to worry about what made us happy because we were so damn hungry. What made us happy was getting something to eat, or we were so damn cold, what was hungry was finding some shelter, or we were so damn horny that what was happy was finding a mate. Now we have all these things. We're just terrible at, and so you really, the ability to take your mind off of things, especially in prep, not take your mind, the ability to have your mind taken off of things for you is a really big thing.
I think there's a lot of choice in that too, though. And that's something that I think a lot of people interplay. It's something I coach into my clients a lot, where you really you have the choice to change the narrative. And at any given point in time, any event is a decision, whether that event is getting up out of bed, doing your cardio, preparing your meal, talking to your spouse, taking your kids to school, going to the gym. Each and every single one of those events is a decision. And in that moment, you decide, I don't want to sound callous, but you decide how you're going to approach it. And the more that you allow your narrative to continue to stay in this kind of almost soggy state, I don't have a lot of compassion or a lot of sympathy for people who choose to stay there. When it's in the context of choosing to suffer for something like a goal, like bodybuilding prep. Obviously, if you're, struggling with some of the brain chemistry of things like depression and some of the other mental disorders going on, very, very, very different case. Very different case. But I think in the context specific to bodybuilding, I think a lot of people really would do well to recognize how much power we have over our day-to-day. There's a lot.
Didn't we talk about this one time? Even like everything you do, you have to do that you don't want to do. You get up to your alarm to go to work. You don't want to, but you do it. You drive to work and you pay gas. This is the one thing that you're doing for you. Why would you it's easy to let your mind drift in the wrong direction and dread it, but why would you do that for the one thing that you're doing for yourself when your whole day, without questioning it, you do things that you have to do that you don't want to do?
Absolutely. Prep has left me, especially this year, really, really thinking a lot about things. And I think it's been probably more in my mind lately, just because I'm realizing, looking at Dave and myself, we're very similar, but also very different. And so hearing how he approaches prep, and even things like, he practices his posing when he needs to, but he's not like, I need to nail this, I have to nail it. And you can tell he's really fixated on getting in his off season now. And it's always interesting to me how people not handle, but like just what becomes the value of the current moment, where the current moment is going to fork at some point, and which of those forks you take and which you value just says a lot. I don't know. It's just interesting to me. It's fascinating to me how different people respond to different or the same situation.
We talked about that too. Like there's real value in hard work and doing the things you don't want to do for a future betterment. And that's incredibly important, because you could, like, you're 18 years old, you don't want to go to college, you just want to party. At that moment, you don't care. I don't care. I'll get some shitty job. I just want to party. That's awesome in that moment. But when you're 43, what's going to happen? You're going to have some shitty job and you're still going to be going to the same shitty party. You know, so what was great at that moment is terrible in the future. Now, the alternative view is maybe not necessarily college, but you do something to better yourself, a trade, a college. You do that thing you don't want to do right now, and that makes a better life for yourself. And that happens every decision you make. Everything you do at any given moment, you basically, what leads to the most enjoyable future life is you doing the thing you don't want to do right now. And in that future, you're still not going to be doing the thing you want to do, but that the sum of that future is going to be so much better that whatever you don't want to do, rather than being at some shitty job so you can go get drunk with your buddies at night, the thing you don't want to do is run your business that's making millions of dollars, or you know, take your family, you know, like do something with your family that you love, or you know, or growing this career that you've built. And all, you know, you're still doing the things you don't want to do, but it's the thing you don't want to do in that future life is 10 times better than the thing you want to do if you just follow that same that what I want to do in the moment.
It's interesting to me the things that people find different joy in, because like right now, like Dave loves his training and he can't wait to be strong again. And it's so fun to see someone who operates in that, because that's not like right now, that's not me at all. And I think being around people who have that different kind of thing they love really broadens you and keeps you from becoming so one-dimensional and thinking that you should only do the thing that you want to do.
It does keep me going during the parts that I don't like, which are few. But I think when we talked about this before, like we brought up a HIIT cardio, which in the off season is not a big deal, especially since there's not that much of it. But you know, halfway through prep, getting on the Stairmaster for 20 minutes a HIIT when you still weigh 260 is really a bitch. But I'm like, do I want to be doing this and bitching about it, or do I want to still be doing this as a top level competitor or as a pro? Because I'm not going to complain if I have to do this as a pro.
Yeah.
We had a couple more questions come through that I thought would be interesting if you're up for it, Justin.
Yep.
Thoughts on using a sauna before a show and the best time to use it, and thoughts on protein sources during a cut: chicken, red meat, fish. Does it matter at all?
Well, I'll do protein sources first. I mean, yes, it matters to an extent because they have different fat content. Now, if you want to really get technical, red meat probably has an amino acid structure most similar to ours, but that's probably not really that important because none of them are going to have a rate limiting amino acid that's especially low. They're all muscle. You know, all the meats are all muscle, and so they're all going to have all the essential amino acids, and none of the essential amino acids are going to be extremely low. You know, they're not going to be deficient in any of them. So they're all arguably good. Now, there's the fat intake. So you know, red meat's going to be higher fat. So you got to take that into consideration. But that if you're consistent with your meals, that really doesn't matter. It matters for a meal. But if you're eating red meat in 2 meals, chicken in 2 meals, fish in 2 meals, and you do that every day, then that's your baseline. We can adjust the diet around that. There's no longer that the red meat has fat in it. We have you're consistent with it. So we know if we need to remove calories, we can reduce carbohydrates or we can reduce added fats because of that consistency holds. And then later on, if we removed all the other extra macronutrients, we can change the red meat to a leaner meat. But it only matters in that moment because there's the extra fat then. But if it's the same, you eat the same things every day, then it's not extra fat anymore. It's your baseline fat intake. And then other than that, some odd things would be chicken reheats terribly. You know, you can make chicken taste pretty good if you eat it when you cook it. If you eat it, put it in the refrigerator, and then reheat it in the microwave at work, it's pretty gross, especially chicken breast. I think chicken tenderloin reheats better. And I actually like the tendon in chicken tenderloin, which most people don't. I think it's chewy. I don't know. I actually, thank you.
That's a problem.
You know, and then fish also, I think, tastes pretty darn good. in limited quantities. Fish once a day tastes great. Orange roughy 6 times a day gets pretty rough.
It's the Jay
And
Cutler diet.
You're
yeah,
so funny there.
and then same thing if you're at work reheating. So there's lots of things like peripheral things to consider. Fish, if you reheat it in the microwave, smells like shit, you know. Turkey tends to reheat terribly too. Now, like a flank steak, I think you can, it's not especially, and when you're dieting, it's amazing, but it's not an especially amazing cut of meat, period. It's pretty rubbery, but it stays the same rubbery when you reheat it. You know, you can, like you can overcook it, you can reheat it in the microwave, you can reheat it again, and it pretty much holds the same flavor. So it doesn't like lose any flavor over time when reheating. So there's, I mean, there's a lot of things to consider, but there's like, those are the things people worry about, or that people will worry about that they're getting the exact right protein source, and then they'll go drink 8 beers and eat pizza with their buddy on Saturday, you know. And I can tell you,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
well, if you're eating pizza and beer on Saturday and not planned obviously in the diet, it doesn't, you know, like the little intricacies between the different protein sources don't matter anymore, and they don't matter. It's like, it's that thing that, you know, like they don't matter. And if you eat those all the time, then, well, like, let me give you a better example. Like intra-workout works, you know, or the perfect carb source after workout works. But if you're eating really good all the time, those things don't matter anymore, because you like, it's like the little icing on the cake. You know, it matters, but only if you're doing all the other things right. And if you're doing all the other things right, those little things don't matter.
What about like lunch meat and deli meat and things like that? Let's say you get caught at work late, or, you know, schedule changes and you're at the grocery store and it's like, well, I've got, you know, turkey breast lunch meat.
It's really not, it's not ideal, because it's going to be really high in sodium, and it's going to be different. It's not, and sodium's good. We want high sodium, but we want high consistent sodium. We don't want fluctuations. And that the amount of sodium in that's probably going to be not consistent with what you add yourself to your meal. It might be, it's probably more. It might be less, but even if it's less, it's not good either, because we lose that consistency. But the quality of the protein, like people say, the biological value, it gets denatured. That's really denatured just means unfolding. The pepsin in your stomach, the acid in your stomach denatures the protein you eat anyways. You can't, it has to, because you can't eat it a folded up protein structure. You have to open it up, and it has to get broken down into diet tripeptide amino acids anyways. So
I always found that funny when people on forums like 10, 15 years ago would have these ridiculous arguments like, can you cook protein powder, or is it like not protein anymore? It's like, no, it's still sequences of amino acids. They've just unwrapped a little bit. Like if you make a homemade protein bar out of your optimum nutrition whey, it's still fine.
Yeah, it would be great if that could happen, because then you could eat stuff that didn't have calories. That would be wonderful. But no, the body extracts calories. We wouldn't all be fat if there was a way to get around it. But yeah, it's probably not the greatest protein source, because there's things like nitrates, but as far as like, unless they're adding bulk, I mean, the reason it could be bad would be like some of the deli meat, turkey won't be this way, but some of the deli meats will be fattier version. Like the ham will tend to be higher fat than like a lean cut of ham. But the ham's not really a bodybuilding meat anyways, you know? So, but yeah, I mean, it's not the best thing ever, but obviously, like, what are we, you know, again, if it comes down to eating deli turkey meat for your protein, or drinking beer and eating pizza, the deli and turkey meat is not going to be your downfall. What was the other question? I'm sorry.
Sauna, hang on.
Oh,
Thoughts on using a sauna before a show, and or the best time to use it?
yeah, my problem with that, it works. My problem with that is when it's best to use it is probably when you've already had the tan on. That's the problem, because you need to the peak weeks people get it all wrong. Well, they don't get it all wrong. They don't like kind of understand what you're trying to do. You need to fill out and dry out. Okay. So what does filling out mean? Filling out means storing glycogen. Now, this is the thing people get wrong, because they think they're going to be off-season full. You're going to be glycogen full. Off-season full is glycogen plus a bunch of extra water. That extra water isn't going to be there. You're going to have glycogen, and you're like someone even Dave's size holds like 1,000 grams of glycogen. What's 1,000 grams? 2.2 pounds. You know, so people like that's glycogen full, a couple of pounds of fullness, not 12, 15, 20 pounds. You're not going to be that kind of full. You're going to have a pound or two of extra glycogen in your body. But to fill out glycogen, you need water. You need water and sodium. So you can't be drying out when you fill out, because filling out involves mixing glucose with water, and sodium brings it to the muscle this way. Drying out takes water and flushes it out. your pee hole the other way. They're opposite things. So you fill out and then dry out. So the sauna would be in the drying out process, which would be after you filled out, closer to the show, like a Friday or whatever. The problem is by then you're probably already going through the tanning protocols, and you have to deal with the fact that you're going to be sweating and how that'll affect your tan. But it works. It's a great way to. And I actually use sauna much more for making weight for like powerlifting and MMA. But I don't really use sauna because there's other ways to dry. It's so easy to flush water the other way. Because a perfect example is we'll have people drink like two gallons or 8 liters of water a day. 8 liters of water is like 19 pounds of water, almost 20 pounds of water. That's 20 pounds of water your body's used to flushing in and out every day. We have that much water to play with just by removing water if we need to a Friday. It's much easier to do that, to flush water, than try to find a sauna. Worry about the fact that you're already probably dehydrated, you're low energy. Being dehydrated affects how you release. So here's actually an interesting thing. So being dehydrated obviously affects how you utilize your blood sugar levels work, because the same thing, glycogen, water, sodium. And one of the things that can happen, and this will happen, this can happen with like diabetics and stuff. If you take too much insulin and then you take a hot shower, what happens is you have now all your blood vessels dilate in response to the heat. Now you have all this extra surface area where the sugar that was floating around the bloodstream can now be transferred to a muscle or to the liver or to a cell somewhere, and you can get like a flash drop in blood sugar. You can get the same thing in a sauna, especially when you're dehydrated, because your blood vessels, your blood volume's low, your blood vessels are all constricted, and so there's not as much surface area. A hole like this has this much surface area. A hole like that has a lot more surface area. You go in a sauna, and maybe your blood sugar is already teetering on low, and you're dehydrated, and you're not very good at stabilizing your blood sugar already. You go in the sauna, get really hot, your blood vessels all expand everywhere. All that extra surface area to take whatever sugar, glucose is in the bloodstream, now gets being able to transport to a cell really quickly. You can get a flash drop in blood sugar that way also, unexpectedly, because you're expecting usually the opposite with dehydration. But primarily, I don't use it really because of the tan. When it's most optimal to use it would be usually when someone's already been getting tanned for the show.